Claire, stop being so dramatic. It was just a joke. Holly's voice drifted from somewhere behind my right shoulder, muffled by the high-pitched whistling sound tearing through my own windpipe. Yellow dust smeared across the white satin of my wedding gloves. The thick ribbon slipped through my fingers because my hands could no longer form a fist. I am 38 years old. As a pediatric occupational therapist, I spend my days teaching children how to regulate their breathing during panic attacks. But standing in the aisle of that renovated Concorde factory, trying to suck air into a closing throat, I knew this was not a panic attack. 60 seconds ago, Mia, our wedding coordinator, had closed the bridal suite door after confirming the label on a white cardboard box. The label clearly read, "All silk, allergy cleared." Then my sister walked in. Holly carried a bouquet identical to the approved photos and shoved it into my hands. The arrangement felt heavy, too heavy for artificial stems. The satin wrap was ice cold against my palms, and a distinct damp spot pressed into my thumb. My brain tried to process why fake flowers would feel like they had just left a refrigerator. Before I could form the question, the processional music started. Holly placed her hand flat against my spine. "The guests are waiting," she whispered, pushing me out the double doors. The smell hit me before I reached the third row of chairs. A thick, aggressively sweet scent that absolutely did not belong to fabric. My throat closed instantly. A violent itch started at the base of my tongue, and my voice turned into a raspy scrape. "Take it away," I gasped, trying to shove the heavy arrangement back toward Holly. My sister stepped backward. Lifting her company camera, she pointed the lens straight at my face. A laugh escaped her throat as she told the lens that I always had to turn everything into a problem. From the front row, our mother caught my eye. Diane offered a tight, composed smile and made a sweeping motion with her hand. "Keep walking," her gesture demanded. "Do not ruin the aesthetic." The bouquet hit the floor as my knees buckled. Someone shouted from the fourth row. Vanessa, the vice president of brand at Bright Path Living and Holly's direct boss, bolted out of her seat. Taking one look at my swelling lips, she heard the wet rattling in my chest. "Call 911, Vanessa screamed at the room. She dropped her purse, ripping the zipper open to pull out a yellow auto-injector. Holly did not drop her camera. She turned to her assistant standing near the aisle runner. "Did you get the close-up?" Holly asked, her voice completely steady. Vanessa lunged forward. She snatched the phone right out of my sister's hands. Ethan was there then. My husband dropped to his knees in his tuxedo, not yelling, not trying to play doctor. Gripping my shoulders, Ethan kept me angled exactly the way Vanessa instructed. He held me steady as she uncapped the needle and drove it into my outer thigh. Through the haze of adrenaline and lack of oxygen, movement near my feet caught my attention. "Guests are stepping on it," Diane announced. My mother reached down to grab the scattered flowers off the floor. Words were impossible. Grabbing Ethan's wrist, I squeezed with everything I had left. My shaking finger pointed at the bouquet, then at the camera Vanessa held. Ethan followed my gaze. He stood up, stepping squarely between Diane and the flowers. "No one touches that," he told my mother. His tone left no room for debate. Mia appeared with an empty plastic bin. The coordinator scooped the flowers inside, clamped the lid shut, and ran toward the venue office to lock the door. Next to me, Holly's assistant was staring at her own empty hands. "The footage already synced to the cloud workspace," the young woman whispered, looking completely terrified. The red and blue lights flashing against the light snow outside felt like a hallucination. Paramedics loaded the stretcher into the back of the ambulance. Diane stood near the open doors. "The florist must have made a terrible mistake," Mom announced loudly to the remaining guests. Holly was crying now. Not for me. She gripped her hair, sobbing about how a scene like this would ruin her upcoming promotion. Lying on the gurney with a plastic mask strapped to my face, I pulled my phone from the hidden dress pocket. The edges of my vision blurred. Still, my thumbs found the keys to send Ethan 3 short lines. "Do not confront her. Save everything. Call Rachel." Ethan read the illuminated screen. He looked at me, realizing I had been preparing for a war long before today. He dialed the number as the ambulance doors slammed shut, bringing the phone to his ear. Rachel picked up on the second ring. She only asked one question. Did Holly use a company camera? Ethan looked through the venue window, straight at the device still clutched in Vanessa's hand. Yes, Ethan said. Rhythmic beeping echoed off the pale hospital walls. The sharp ache in my throat felt like I had swallowed crushed glass. I blinked against the harsh fluorescent lights of the recovery room, trying to clear my blurred vision. A plastic tube taped to the back of my hand tethered me to a metal IV pole, dripping clear fluid directly into my vein. A doctor stood at the foot of my bed, quietly explaining the risk of a biphasic reaction to Ethan. He said the anaphylaxis could return even after the initial epinephrine wore off, so they were keeping me overnight for strict medical observation. Ethan dragged a green vinyl chair closer to my bedside. His eyes looked entirely bloodshot, but his voice stayed perfectly level. The venue coordinator locked the bouquet in the main office, Ethan said. He leaned forward, resting his elbows heavily on his knees. Vanessa filed an incident report with her corporate office before she even left the parking lot. Most brides would ask about their ruined dress. I swallowed hard, fighting the residual swelling that still coated the back of my tongue. Is the camera footage safe? I whispered. Ethan nodded, brushing a stray piece of hair from my damp forehead. Mia secured the memory cards before anyone else could touch them, he assured me. The thick, suffocating scent of gardenia perfume announced my mother before she pushed the heavy wooden door open. Diane rushed to the edge of the mattress, throwing her arms around my neck and squeezing tight enough to pinch the IV line against my skin. Thank God you are all right, Mom cried, her tears wetting the shoulder of my hospital gown. The florist made an unforgivable mistake, but we are going to get through this together. I turned my head away from the overpowering perfume, seeking fresh air. Did you know the real flowers were in that box? I asked. Diane pulled back abruptly. Her face twisted into a practiced mask of wounded shock. How can you even ask that? She demanded, placing a hand over her chest. Your sister is practically catatonic in the hallway. Holly made a stupid mistake trusting that vendor. And now you are acting like she planned a murder. Mom gripped the metal bedrail, her knuckles turning white under the bright lights. You cannot ruin her entire career over one clumsy moment, she insisted, her voice dropping into a harsh, commanding whisper. She is your family. Arguing requires oxygen. And I barely had enough air to keep my own lungs inflated. The familiar anger sitting behind my ribs did not explode into screaming. It simply hardened into something very cold and very patient. Put that in writing, Mom, I croaked out. My throat burned with every single syllable. I cannot process this while medicated. Just text me what you want me to say. Diane actually looked relieved. The woman who raised me genuinely believed I was returning to my usual role of absorbing the family mess to keep the peace. She pulled her phone from her designer purse, her thumbs flying across the glass screen. A moment later, my device buzzed on the plastic tray table. I picked the phone up and read the long paragraph. Diane had typed out exactly what I needed. She wrote that Holly only wanted to prove I exaggerate my allergies, and it was just a harmless prank gone slightly wrong. Without saying another word, I dragged her message directly into a secure cloud folder labeled House Receipts. 3 months ago, I had opened a mysterious web link sent by an anonymous subscriber. Staring back at me on that web page was a video of myself, crying bitterly at our father's funeral. Holly had recut the raw footage, adding a humorous voiceover about her overly dramatic older sister throwing a tantrum over estate inheritance. That was the exact day I sat down in Rachel Kim's law office. Rachel had poured me a glass of cold water and handed me a yellow legal pad. Never argue on the phone, the attorney had instructed. Tapping her pen on the mahogany desk. Let them talk, let them feel comfortable, and get absolutely everything in writing. Lying in the hospital bed, staring at my mother's written admission, I realized the absolute truth. I had given my sister one final chance to respect my medical boundaries at my wedding. Holly chose the content instead. Diane saw me put the phone down and entirely misinterpreted my silence. Listen to me, Mom said, her tone completely dropping the tearful, worried act. If you try to make a legal spectacle out of this, I will pull every cent of the vendor payments for this wedding. Ethan stood up from his vinyl chair, crossing his arms over his chest. There are no payments to pull, Diane. my husband said quietly. Claire and I paid every deposit ourselves. My mother froze in place. Her eyes darted between Ethan and me, rapidly calculating her missing leverage. She did not know I had spent the entire last year quietly untangling my life from hers. The joint bank accounts were closed. The emergency contacts had been permanently updated. The townhouse was entirely in my name, purchased with my own salary. I just had not bragged about any of it. Sunday morning brought clear winter sunlight streaming through the hospital blinds. It also brought the delivery of a massive digital and physical legal demand package. Rachel Kim did not wait for the business week to officially begin. Ethan sat beside my bed, scrolling through a barrage of incoming messages. He read the updates aloud as my family panicked in real time. Holly had just received a formal preservation notice delivered straight to her apartment door. The legal document explicitly required her to stop deleting texts, emails, and raw video footage. Attached to the notice was a preliminary itemized medical statement. The list included the emergency ambulance ride, the trauma room fees, the overnight hospital observation, and the specialized allergy treatments. The current estimate sat at exactly $80,000. That number was more than my sister's annual corporate bonus. The first page of the legal demand was devastatingly simple. Under the primary billing section, Rachel had clearly printed one defining sentence. Responsible party named Holly Bennett. Ethan read another message from the extended family group chat. Holly is screaming at your mother, he said, his eyes scanning the bright screen. She is furious about the hospital money. Then Ethan paused, tilting his phone toward me so I could read the text myself. He pointed to the final paragraph of the preservation notice Rachel had sent. The clause specifically demanded a legal hold on all BrightPath Cloud uploads associated with the Bennett wedding project. My sister had probably spent all night desperately scrubbing the event footage from her personal phone, but the company camera automatically synced to a corporate server. Holly just realized her employer held the undeniable evidence she could no longer erase. My phone vibrated against the plastic hospital tray table, the buzzing sound sharp and annoying in the quiet room. Another notification joined the dozen already stacking up on the locked screen, illuminating the dark glass. Ethan picked up the device, his thumb scrolling past a barrage of text messages from aunts and cousins. Holly had just posted a perfectly curated update across all her social media channels, striking before I could even speak for myself. She painted a heartbreaking picture of a frightening medical incident interrupting her beloved sister's wedding, carefully asking for privacy while heavily implying a careless florist had mixed up the orders. Relatives flooded my inbox with demands to forgive my sibling, begging me not to let a simple vendor mistake cost Holly her corporate job. I stared at the water stains on the ceiling tiles and chose absolute silence. Answering them would only give my sister the emotional argument she desperately needed to validate her victimhood, and I refused to play my assigned role anymore. The sharp ringtone of Ethan's cell phone broke the tension in the recovery room. My husband glanced at the caller identification before answering, spoke in low, clipped tones for a moment, and then handed the device directly to me. Vanessa Grant was on the line. The vice president of brand at BrightPath Living did not offer shallow pleasantries or empty wishes for my recovery. Her voice carried a heavy, professional weight that commanded attention. Vanessa formally apologized for not recognizing that her employee was actively using my wedding as a corporate project, her tone tight with restrained anger. She explained that the camera my sister carried belonged to the company, and the raw footage had automatically uploaded to their secure digital workspace the exact moment it was recorded. Vanessa asked for my explicit permission to place a legal hold on those files for their internal compliance review, and I agreed immediately. But I made one condition incredibly clear. BrightPath could use the data for their investigation, but they did not have the right to tell my story to the public. My body, my narrative, and I would maintain strict control over who saw my physical collapse. Rachel Kim arrived at the hospital an hour later. The attorney pulled a printed document from her leather briefcase and laid it flat across my knees. It was the allergy protocol email I had sent exactly 3 weeks before the wedding. We looked at the response printed at the very bottom of the page. Holly had replied within 10 minutes of receiving the medical warning. Got it, my sister had typed. Fake flowers only, I promise. That single printed line dismantled the entire narrative my family was desperately trying to build. Holly could never claim ignorance in front of a compliance board or a judge, when her own written words proved she knew exactly how dangerous lily pollen was to my immune system. Rachel tapped her silver pen against the paper, explaining that the BrightPath compliance team had already started pulling corporate expense records. They found a glaring anomaly from the week of the wedding. My sister had used her company credit card to pay a vendor that was explicitly not on the approved corporate list. The transaction was categorized under visual content props. When confronted by human resources earlier that morning, Holly claimed the charge was for a completely different marketing campaign, but the digital timestamp on the delivery receipt proved otherwise. A courier had dropped that exact package at the Concord venue at 9 a.m. on Saturday, just hours before my throat closed. My college roommate sent a text message right after Rachel left the room. She told me to post the raw video of my allergic reaction online to make the public turn against Holly. The suggestion made my stomach twist into a hard knot, and I handed my phone back to Ethan. I refused. That footage showed my physical body failing, my breathing stopping, and my dignity stripped away in front of 100 guests. Holly had already tried to turn my humiliation into a consumable product for her audience, so posting the video myself would only continue the cycle of exploiting my own trauma for engagement. My revenge required strict boundaries, and I would not become the very monster I was fighting. Later that afternoon, an encrypted email arrived from Vanessa. She had forwarded a file her information technology department had recovered from my sister's corporate drive. Ethan opened the attachment on his tablet, sitting on the edge of my hospital bed so we could read the text together. It was a formal content strategy deck. The title page read, "My dramatic sister finally learns to loosen up." The document outlined a complete promotion case study, proving my sister had drafted captions weeks in advance. She described how her control-freak sister discovered her wedding flowers were real and finally learned to take a joke. The primary goal of the project was explicitly listed as driving viewer engagement to secure a vice president title. The prank was never a spontaneous, clumsy mistake. It was a carefully calculated career pitch. Ethan scrolled to the final page of the presentation. His breathing hitched, and his hand tightened around the plastic casing of the tablet. He pointed to a small, highlighted note tucked into the margin of the document. "Mom guarantees Claire will react exactly the way we need." The sharp vibration of my cell phone broke the quiet atmosphere of our townhouse living room. Reaching across the wooden coffee table, I watched Mia's name flash across the bright screen. Our wedding coordinator sounded entirely terrified when I answered the call. Holly had just directed her lawyer to send a threatening cease and desist letter to Mia, officially blaming the venue staff for letting toxic pollen anywhere near the ceremony. I closed my eyes, listening to the young woman frantically apologize for a mistake she never actually made. My throat still ached when I spoke, but my tone stayed firm. I told Mia to take a deep breath and ignore the legal threat. I did not need a convenient scapegoat to take the fall for my family, but I desperately needed her to share every piece of documentation she possessed. 10 minutes later, a heavy image file landed in my email inbox. Mia had sent a high-resolution photograph taken exactly 1 hour before the processional music started. The picture showed the approved artificial arrangement resting safely inside its white cardboard delivery box. Zooming in on the screen, a tiny manufacturing imperfection became visible. One single silk petal near the center, folded sharply at an unnatural angle, and a loose silver thread hung freely from the satin binding. That specific bent petal proved everything. The frozen, heavy mass of flowers shoved into my hands outside the sanctuary doors had possessed perfectly crisp edges and a flawless ribbon wrap. My sister had not simply mixed up two identical boxes in a chaotic bridal suite. She had commissioned a deliberate replica. A video attachment followed the photograph. The venue security camera from the second-floor hallway captured a silent, damning performance. At 2:00, Mia left my room holding her silver clipboard, effectively finishing her final safety sweep. 5 minutes passed on the digital timestamp. Then, Holly appeared on the screen. My sister carried a rectangular box tucked discreetly under a long protective garment bag. In the corner of the corridor, my mother stood waiting. Diane stared intensely at her gold wristwatch, tapped a quick message into her phone, and gave Holly a sharp nod right before the heavy wooden doors swung open. Rachel called me later that same afternoon with the missing puzzle piece. The strange corporate expense report from Bright Path Living had finally led my attorney to a physical location. An independent floral studio located 30 miles outside of Boston confirmed fulfilling a highly unusual rush order. The shop owner forwarded the email chain directly to Rachel, assuming my lawyer was simply wrapping up standard vendor payment disputes. Reading the printed correspondence made my chest tighten with a familiar, suffocating panic. Holly had attached a detailed photograph of my silk arrangement to her initial email, demanding an exact, real flower copy. Her written instructions were meticulously specific. The fresh stems must be completely hidden inside a plastic holder. The ribbon wrap had to be identical to the provided reference picture, and the delivery container could not feature any obvious floral branding. The suburban florist simply assumed a wealthy bride wanted an elaborate surprise reveal for her groom. The tablet slipped from my fingers, hitting the couch cushions with a soft thud. I pressed the heels of my hands into my eyes, fighting a sudden wave of nauseating guilt. The shockingly cold ribbon, the unexpected heavy weight, the damp spot pressing against my thumb all flashed vividly through my memory. I should have thrown it on the floor, I whispered to the empty room. I felt the difference immediately, and I still walked down that aisle anyway. Ethan walked out of the kitchen, carrying 2 steaming mugs of tea. He set them on the table and sat beside me, his solid presence anchoring me back to reality. My husband reminded me gently that I had distributed a strict written safety protocol weeks in advance. Mia had officially cleared the room, the processional music was already playing loudly, and Holly was my own sister. You trusted your family because they gave you absolutely no time to question the switch, Ethan said, pulling my hands away from my face. The person who breaks the safety system is entirely responsible, Claire. Not the person who trusted it. My husband was right, and the absolute proof of their calculated timing arrived the very next morning. Vanessa sent a secure digital file containing the text message logs recovered from Holly's corporate cell phone. My sister had used the company device to text Diane while hiding out in the venue hallway. I scrolled through the bright green bubbles, reading the exact conversation my mother and sister shared while I sat happily in the bridal suite. What if she notices the wait? Holly had typed. Hand it to her right when the music starts, Diane replied instantly. She will not stop her own wedding to inspect a bouquet in front of 100 waiting guests. A full minute passed on the digital timestamp before my sister sent her next message. She could have a real medical reaction, Holly wrote, showing a brief flash of hesitation. Diane delivered the final verdict just seconds before the processional began. At worst, she will cough and finally prove my point. My eyes scanned past the horrible wedding day messages, scrolling upward through their chat history. A hyperlinked text sent exactly 2 months prior caught my attention. Holly had shared a web address with our mother, accompanied by a single chilling sentence. Subscribers loved the funeral clip, so this will be bigger. The glowing hyperlink sat at the bottom of the text thread, pulsing like a tiny blue heartbeat against the white screen. Rachel had already warned us about this specific web address during our morning phone call. A former follower of my sister had grown disgusted by the wedding incident and legally surrendered their login credentials to my attorney. Ethan brought his laptop to the coffee table, carefully typing the provided username and password into the portal. The web page loaded in a grid of brightly colored thumbnails. A massive banner across the top read, "The Bennett Family Chaos Archive." My stomach twisted into a tight knot. Staring back at me from the screen were dozens of stolen moments. I recognized the green wool coat I wore 3 winters ago, the familiar floral wallpaper of my old apartment, and the exhausted slump of my own shoulders. Holly had monetized my entire existence. Ethan moved the cursor over a video titled, "Sister Loses Her Mind Over Inheritance." He glanced at me for permission, and I gave a stiff nod. The speakers clicked softly before playing the audio of my own jagged sobbing. The footage showed me standing in the driveway of our childhood home, wearing a black dress, wiping mascara from my cheeks just 2 days after our father died. A bouncy text graphic popped across the screen, claiming I was throwing a massive tantrum because I did not get the vintage car. My hands curled into tight fists against my thighs. I remembered that exact afternoon with perfect clarity. Mom had just casually mentioned selling Dad's antique watch collection to a pawn shop without asking anyone. Holly stood by the driveway, promising she was only texting a friend, but her phone lens had been pointed directly at my grief. She took my pain and rewrote the narrative for an audience of paying strangers. We clicked the next file, moving chronologically through the nightmare. A video from 2 years ago showed my sister whispering into her front-facing camera, hiding in my guest bedroom. Holly told her subscribers that I had kidnapped her and confiscated her phone because my need for absolute control was spiraling out of hand. The reality of that particular weekend hit me like a physical blow. Holly had shown up at my townhouse at 2 a.m, weeping over a catastrophic public relations mistake she made with a major wellness client. I stayed awake all night, pouring coffee and drafting a professional apology email to save her career. I kept her hidden in my house to protect her from our mother's relentless judgment. Following Rachel's strict advice about documenting everything, I had saved those drafted apology emails and the grocery receipts from that weekend. Opening my secure house receipts folder on the tablet, I aligned my saved files with the video upload dates. Every single time I sacrificed my own peace to rescue my sister, Holly turned my loyalty into premium content. The deepest betrayal did not come from the camera lens. It came from the voice speaking behind it. Ethan clicked a blurry audio file labeled Medical Update on the difficult one. The recording discussed my private blood test results and my recent decision to start attending specialized therapy. Only one person on Earth knew those specific medical details. My mother's voice echoed through the living room speakers. Diane sounded conversational, almost cheerful, as she complained to Holly about my supposedly dramatic health issues. The digital metadata attached to the original file showed the exact origin of the recording. The data confirmed the audio was sent directly from a device registered to Diane Bennett. Mom was not just turning a blind eye to the online group. The woman who raised me was the primary source of the gossip. Ethan reached across the keyboard, his fingers resting heavily on the trackpad. "Let me close this," my husband said, his voice thick with an anger he rarely showed. "You do not need to watch your own family tear you apart." I placed my hand over his, stopping the movement. A heavy exhaustion settled deep in my bones, but the cold logic finally overpowered the shock. "We keep going," I told him, keeping my breathing steady. "We watch one file at a time, we log the exact timestamp, and we build the timeline." We spent the next 3 hours working like forensic accountants, mapping my personal tragedies against the company files Vanessa had provided. The corporate compliance team had unearthed a detailed revenue dashboard my sister submitted for her promotion pitch. The graphs showed a massive spike in paying subscribers during the month of my father's funeral. Engagement numbers skyrocketed again the week I had my first severe allergic reaction at a family dinner. Holly built her entire professional portfolio on my misery, and BrightPath Living had the financial records to prove it. Scanning the bottom of the revenue spreadsheet, a recurring expense line caught my attention. Every single month, my sister transferred a substantial portion of the subscription money out of her account. The transaction description was clearly labeled as Diane Consulting. My mother was getting paid for every secret she surrendered. I opened my own banking application on the tablet, pulling up my transfer history from 3 years ago. I scrolled back to a specific Tuesday in November. That was the afternoon Diane sat at my kitchen counter, crying into a tissue, swearing she could not afford a necessary dental surgery. I had drained my emergency savings that day, handing over a massive sum because I could not bear to see my mother in pain. Comparing the two digital screens, the ultimate truth finally clicked into place. The very first consulting fee Diane received from the paid content group was deposited into her account exactly 2 days after she took my emergency savings. I paid for a surgery she could already afford, while she collected a paycheck for selling the story of my financial struggle. The glowing screens of the laptop and tablet illuminated the dark living room, casting harsh shadows across the walls. Staring at the bank transfer dates side by side, the ultimate truth settled heavy and cold in my chest. 3 years ago, freezing rainwater had leaked steadily through the ceiling of our townhouse during a massive winter storm. Ethan and I had diligently saved for months to replace that damaged roof. We drained that exact savings account to pay for Mom's emergency dental surgery because she sat at my kitchen counter, weeping miserably into a paper napkin about surviving on a fixed income. Diane never actually lacked the funds. The woman simply wanted to see if I would still play the role of the endlessly sacrificing daughter. My quiet kindness was never appreciated or respected. It was only documented by my own family as absolute proof of how easily I could be manipulated. The telephone began ringing early the next morning. My aunt called first, repeating the exact guilt-ridden phrases Diane had undoubtedly rehearsed with her over breakfast. A younger cousin left a long voicemail an hour later, warning that a corporate firing would absolutely destroy our mother's fragile health. Nobody bothered to ask how my throat felt. Nobody inquired about the emergency room or the terrifying ambulance ride. When my uncle finally dialed my number, I answered the call. He instantly launched into a stern speech about keeping messy problems inside the house, reminding me that blood is thicker than water. "Did you read the written allergy protocol I sent 3 weeks ago?" I asked him, keeping my voice completely steady. "Have you watched the security footage of me collapsing in the aisle?" Heavy silence filled the speaker. My uncle awkwardly admitted he had not seen any documents or videos. "Then you are operating on completely incomplete information," I told him. "Every single future communication regarding this incident needs to go directly through my attorney." I pressed the red button, ending the conversation before he could utter another empty platitude. Rachel requested a secure video conference right before lunch. The attorney's face appeared on my laptop, looking distinctly unimpressed as she read from a newly received legal file. Holly had officially retained a defense lawyer. The opposing counsel offered to pay exactly half of my estimated medical bills via an immediate wire transfer. The seemingly generous offer came with 3 incredibly specific conditions attached. I had to sign a massive non-disclosure agreement, officially classify the wedding incident as a misguided family prank across all my social media platforms, and formally cease all contact with the BrightPath Living Human Resources Department. They wanted to murder the digital evidence before the Corporate Compliance Board could ever review it. The proposed financial relief would instantly erase the crushing weight of the hospital debt, and walking away would definitely stop the relentless family phone calls. But signing that paper meant giving my sister permission to rewrite history one more time. "Reject the offer entirely," I instructed Rachel. Ethan brought 2 mugs of dark roast coffee to the table, setting a yellow legal pad in front of me. We needed a concrete strategy, something measurable that did not rely on changing the minds of our stubborn relatives. Rachel, Ethan, and I spent the next hour defining 3 absolute targets. We required full medical restitution, complete privacy accountability regarding the paid internet group, and ironclad legal protection from future contact. A younger, angrier version of myself would have demanded a public apology, desperately hoping to make the internet hate my sister. I crossed that thought completely out of my mind. Chasing public vindication would only turn me into someone who valued a digital audience over actual peace. I chose quiet, undeniable results instead. The strategy felt completely solid until my cell phone vibrated with an incoming voice note. The screen displayed a notification I should never have received, considering the strict legal boundary Rachel had just established. Holly had bypassed the lawyers entirely. Tapping the play icon, my sister's tearful voice filled the quiet room. She sounded absolutely broken, begging me to remember the terrible night I let her sleep in my guest room after her major public relations disaster. She swore Mom was the true mastermind behind the entire floral arrangement, crying loudly that Diane had aggressively pressured her into taking the risk. The raw emotion in her apology sounded incredibly convincing. But a tiny detail on the digital file caught my attention. The location metadata attached to the audio message clearly displayed a specific street address in downtown Boston. My sister was broadcasting her desperate, tearful apology from inside the BrightPath Living corporate headquarters at 9 o'clock at night. I forwarded the audio file straight to Rachel, explicitly pointing out the suspicious location tag. The attorney immediately contacted the corporate compliance director. The response from Vanessa arrived the following morning, carrying the heavy weight of a professional execution. The BrightPath server audit logs painted a damning picture of that late-night office visit. My sister had not gone to the building to collect personal belongings or seek comfort. Minutes after receiving Rachel's formal preservation notice, Holly had logged into a terminal and attempted to permanently delete the entire shared cloud folder. The system administrator caught her account frantically downloading the paid subscriber lists and erasing the drafted captions from the wedding promotion deck. Her late-night panic transformed a severe ethical violation into a verifiable corporate cover-up. Vanessa sent one final update before the weekend officially began. The compliance department had upgraded their routine review to a formal corporate investigation. The hearing was scheduled for Monday morning, but my sister had already launched her counterattack. Holly had just submitted a sworn statement to Human Resources, claiming I had spent the last 6 months orchestrating a jealous conspiracy to destroy her entire career. Monday morning arrived gray and bitterly cold, with rain lashing against the windows of our Waltham townhouse. I stayed sitting at my kitchen island, wrapping both hands around a warm ceramic mug to steady my nerves. Going into the Boston corporate office would only give my sister the dramatic audience she desperately craved, and my lungs still burned with a dull ache if I breathed too deeply. Instead of attending the formal compliance hearing in person, I had drafted a single-page statement detailing the timeline of my physical collapse and the resulting medical debt. Vanessa called our house precisely at noon, her voice echoing slightly over the speakerphone resting on the granite counter. The vice president sounded completely exhausted, but she kept her promise to protect my privacy. She confirmed the compliance board only viewed the raw video footage once behind closed doors, keeping my physical breakdown away from office gossip. Then, Vanessa began reading straight from the official hearing transcript. Holly had walked into the boardroom wearing a conservative gray suit and a practiced, tearful expression. According to the record, my sister opened her defense by playing the terrified, innocent sibling. She swore the suburban florist had completely mixed up the delivery boxes, claiming she had absolutely no idea the heavy stems were real until I collapsed. The lead compliance officer did not argue with her tears. He simply slid a printed copy of the corporate expense receipt across the polished mahogany table. The vendor confirmation clearly highlighted my sister's written request for an exact, real flower copy. Caught in her very first contradiction, Holly smoothly pivoted. Vanessa explained how the crying stopped instantly. My sister shifted her posture in the leather chair, claiming she assumed the fresh blooms were completely safe and pollen-free. Rachel had prepared us for that exact maneuver. The corporate investigator flipped to the next page in his manila folder, revealing the printed allergy protocol email. He read Holly's own written reply out loud for the entire executive board to hear. "Got it, fake flowers only, I promise." The transcript showed the tension escalating. Holly aggressively insisted she never actually touched the bridal arrangement that morning. She claimed Mia, the venue coordinator, must have handed me the wrong cardboard box in the rush of the moment. That desperate lie crumbled under the weight of digital video. The compliance team pressed play on the hallway security feed. Every director in the room watched Holly carry the concealed rectangular box toward the bridal suite, exchange knowing nods with our mother, and walk away hiding the safe silk arrangement under a black garment bag. Running out of external scapegoats, Holly aimed her defense strategy closer to home. She pointed a manicured finger at the frozen video frame of our mother. "Diane told me to do it," my sister announced to the silent room. Vanessa paused her reading, letting out a sharp breath over the phone line. The compliance director asked Holly a very simple question right then, the executive told us. He asked why a simple family prank required a corporate credit card. My sister had no answer for the financial trail, but the hearing was far from over. The real devastation arrived when the board reviewed the audio from the wedding aisle. Vanessa described the heavy, sickening silence in the boardroom as the raw microphone feed echoed off the walls. The executives heard my breath turn into a desperate, wet rattle. They heard Holly laughing in the background. "Keep rolling," my sister's recorded voice commanded the camera assistant. "She is going to lose it." Then came the chaotic sound of Vanessa dropping her purse and shouting for an ambulance. Over the rising panic of a medical emergency, the microphone caught my sister's ultimate priority. "Did you get the close-up?" Holly asked. Hearing those specific words read back to me made the kitchen feel incredibly small. Ethan reached across the counter, covering my cold hand with his warm palm. The compliance board moved directly to the recovered server drive. They projected the promotion strategy deck and the paid subscriber dashboard onto the wall for everyone to analyze. Faced with undeniable proof of unauthorized monetization and calculated cruelty, the corporate mask finally slipped off. According to Vanessa, Holly completely abandoned the weeping sister routine. Her voice turned flat and chillingly clinical. She stared directly at the Human Resources Director and stated that our mother provided all the private medical information for the internet channel. Diane Bennett bears the majority of the responsibility for this content, Holly declared, officially selling out the woman who had protected her for 30 years. The formal verdict required less than 20 minutes of deliberation. Bright Path Living terminated Holly effective immediately for gross misconduct, unauthorized misuse of corporate resources, dishonesty during an active investigation, and the attempted destruction of company data. The Human Resources Department instantly voided her annual performance bonus and canceled all her unvested equity shares according to their strict ethical policy. Vanessa delivered the final crushing blow before ending our call. The company lawyers were officially handing the entire investigation file over to their liability insurer and the proper law enforcement authorities. Furthermore, 3 major brand partners had already paused their lucrative sponsorship contracts pending a criminal review. My sister had gambled her entire career on a single cruel video, and she lost absolutely everything. Ethan carried our empty coffee mugs to the sink, turning on the warm water. I stayed seated at the island, staring at the dark screen of my phone, trying to process the sheer scale of the destruction. The golden child had finally faced a consequence she could not cry her way out of. To save herself, she had thrown our mother directly under the moving wheels. 10 minutes later, the quiet peace of the kitchen shattered. My cell phone buzzed against the granite counter, vibrating violently with an incoming call. The caller identification displayed Diane Bennett. I almost let the device ring straight into voicemail, but Rachel had instructed me to collect every single piece of evidence, and a fracturing alliance always produces careless mistakes. I tapped the green button and brought the speaker to my ear. Mom did not bother with a standard greeting. She sounded completely breathless, her voice trembling with a frantic, unhinged energy. "I just received a call from your sister's lawyer," Diane gasped out. Holly gave them my name, and she told them I co-designed the reaction plan for the wedding. I kept my mouth shut, letting the heavy silence pull the truth out of her. "Your sister is lying to save her own skin," my mother desperately declared into the phone. "Do not listen to her, Claire. I have the proof that she planned everything." The sound of Diane's frantic breathing echoed through the phone speaker. The woman who had spent 30 years demanding my absolute loyalty was now offering up her favorite child on a silver platter. My mother promised to deliver undeniable evidence that Holly knew the flowers were dangerous all along. Her voice dropped into a conspiratorial whisper, suggesting a simple trade. Diane wanted me to completely remove her name from the civil lawsuit. Furthermore, she expected a formal invitation to whatever replacement wedding ceremony Ethan and I decided to host in the future. I stared at the rain sliding down the kitchen window, feeling a strange, hollow calm settling over my chest. "Will you send every single text message on your phone directly to my attorney?" I asked her. Heavy, suffocating silence filled the line. Diane wanted to control the narrative, not surrender her entire digital history. I pressed the red button and placed the device face down on the granite counter. The legal discovery process consumed the next 2 months of our lives, turning our dining room table into a mountain of printed transcripts and highlighted timelines. Rachel worked relentlessly, pulling every thread of the fractured alliance. Holly formally submitted a completely new defense strategy through her legal counsel. My sister officially claimed our mother had emotionally manipulated her into believing my severe allergy was entirely fabricated. To support this sudden victim narrative, Holly willingly surrendered months of private text messages. The printed pages showed Diane repeatedly calling me an attention seeker, assuring her younger daughter that my medical history was completely exaggerated. But in her desperate attempt to sink our mother, my sister inadvertently confessed to a fatal detail. Her own legal filing openly admitted she had read my strict safety protocol before placing the order for the fresh lilies. Every single time one of them tried to shift the blame, they only succeeded in adding another layer of concrete to their own sinking shoes. We thought the text messages were the strongest piece of evidence, but the turning point arrived on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Rachel called me from her downtown office, her usually composed voice carrying a sharp edge of triumph. A freelance camera assistant named Lily Chen had just changed the entire trajectory of the investigation. Lily had worked as an independent contractor for the production company Brightpath hired to film my wedding. After reading Holly's sworn statement, blaming the external crew for the missing safety checks, the young assistant decided to correct the official record. Lily completely understood standard industry workflow. The production team utilized a dual-system audio setup, meaning every single microphone recording was automatically backed up as a checksum clone onto an encrypted field drive. My sister had frantically deleted the files from the Brightpath corporate cloud workspace, mistakenly believing she destroyed the only copy. But the original physical drive remained safely locked inside a fireproof safe at the production company headquarters, preserved under a standard contractor retention policy. Rachel immediately issued a subpoena, securing the clean audio files, along with an unbroken chain of custody manifest. Ethan and I drove to the law office the following morning. We sat in plush leather chairs while Rachel connected a small speaker to her laptop. The audio file captured the chaotic ambient noise of the venue hallway, exactly 3 minutes before the processional music started. "Keep the flowers close enough for the reaction to read on camera," Diane instructed clearly over the background chatter. A rustling sound indicated shifting fabric. Then, my sister spoke. "She will not actually stop breathing, right?" Holly asked, her tone laced with a sudden, nervous hesitation. My mother did not hesitate. "Claire always makes everything sound fatal," Diane replied, her voice dripping with casual disdain. Hearing the actual recording felt fundamentally different than reading text messages. They had openly discussed my physical distress as a necessary plot point for their internet video. They acknowledged the medical risk and explicitly chose to ignore it. Armed with the raw audio transcript, Rachel cornered both women during their separate sworn depositions. Under penalty of perjury, Diane initially testified that she never once discussed my potential physical reaction with anyone. Rachel simply slid the audio transcript across the table. Watching her carefully constructed lie collapse, my mother frantically changed her story, suddenly claiming she only trusted Holly's repeated assurances about the arrangement being safe. Across town on a different afternoon, Holly sat in a separate conference room and swore under oath that Diane personally guaranteed the allergy was completely fake. The two women were permanently locked into fundamentally contradicting testimonies. Neither could tell the truth without facing severe legal consequences, and their carefully maintained public image shattered into jagged pieces. The realization of their impending ruin prompted one final, desperate campaign for salvation. 2 thick envelopes arrived in my mailbox on the same afternoon. Diane sent a sprawling, tear-stained letter warning that my sister would face actual prison time if I refused to submit a statement asking the judge for maximum leniency. Holly mailed a typed document via her lawyer, insisting our mother would lose her beloved vacation property to legal fees if I did not formally drop Diane from the civil claim. Standing by the mailbox in the late summer heat, I read both letters twice. For 3 decades, my designated purpose in the Bennett family was absorbing the pain so they would never have to face the consequences of their own actions. They were demanding I play the exact same role one last time. I carried the envelopes straight to the kitchen recycling bin and dropped them inside. Walking back into the living room, I dialed my attorney. "Proceed with the maximum settlement demands and file the permanent no-contact orders," I told Rachel, finally letting go of the heavy guilt I had carried my entire life. Rachel let out a satisfied breath over the phone. "I am glad you said that," the attorney replied. "The local prosecutor just called my office with an update on the criminal charges. The state was fully prepared to offer Holly a negotiated plea deal, but the agreement hinged on 2 non-negotiable conditions. My sister had to officially plead guilty to intentional exposure and reckless endangerment. Furthermore, the prosecutor required her to surrender every single financial record connecting our mother to the exploited internet channel. Holly had exactly 48 hours to choose between saving her own freedom or protecting the mother who helped orchestrate her downfall. 11 months passed, bringing heavy snow back to the Massachusetts suburbs. My lungs had fully healed, but the sharp, sweet scent of lilies spilling from a local grocery store display still made my chest seize tight. Ethan and I tracked our slow recovery in a thick binder of receipts. We logged the final hospital bills, the therapy co-payments, the lost professional wages, and the completely ruined catering deposits. The consequences for my family looked vastly different. My sister officially lost her corporate sponsorship deals and listed her luxury condominium on the real estate market. Mom silently resigned from her prestigious charity board after her cruel text messages circulated through our extended family group chats. The final civil mediation took place in a windowless conference room in downtown Boston. The space smelled strongly of stale coffee and industrial carpet cleaner. Opposing counsel slid a thick stack of printed paper across the mahogany table toward Rachel. They offered to wire the entire medical restitution amount by the end of the business day. That massive financial relief came with a familiar, suffocating condition. Holly wanted me to sign a broad, non-disclosure agreement and publicly label my near-death experience a simple family misunderstanding. Diane sat at the far end of the long table, staring at her manicured hands. Mom wept quietly, begging me to let her keep the Cape Cod vacation property. She called the small cottage the last place our family was truly happy together, deliberately weaponizing my childhood memories. I looked at the woman who raised me and refused to sign a single lie. Rachel rejected the gag order entirely. My attorney secured the full financial damages and locked down permanent no-contact orders, leaving the truth completely intact and enforceable. A few weeks later, the heavy oak doors of the Suffolk County Courthouse swung shut behind me. Holly stood before the judge wearing a wrinkled beige blouse instead of her usual designer suits. No company cameras recorded her performance today. Staring straight ahead, my sister formally pleaded guilty to intentional exposure and reckless endangerment. The magistrate read the final sentence aloud to the silent room. Holly received actual physical confinement in a county facility, followed by years of supervised probation and mandatory court-ordered restitution. A permanent criminal record effectively killed her wellness brand career. Sitting in the wooden gallery, I did not ask the state for maximum vengeance or performative cruelty. I simply read a truthful victim impact statement into the official record, letting the unvarnished facts stand completely alone. Diane avoided a criminal indictment by cooperating fully with the prosecutor, but her cooperation carried a massive social price tag. To meet her portion of the civil settlement damages, the beloved Cape Cod property officially went on the market. Furthermore, Holly made sure the family isolation was absolute. Speaking to a handful of local reporters outside the courthouse steps, the former content director loudly blamed our mother for teaching her to view my physical pain as an acceptable commodity. The golden child finally turned her teeth on her primary protector. The courtroom corridors were completely empty when I finally walked toward the exit. But a familiar, trembling voice echoed near the metal detectors. Holly waited by the glass doors, clutching a cheap canvas tote bag against her chest. "Are you happy now?" she asked. Her tone cracked, completely devoid of any polished internet charisma. "You completely destroyed your own sister." I stopped walking. I did not raise my voice, and I did not look away from her tired eyes. "I did not order a duplicate flower arrangement," I told her quietly. "I did not turn on a company camera while someone choked. I did not write those mocking captions, and I certainly did not try to delete corporate files in the middle of the night." Her jaw tightened, desperately searching for an excuse that no longer existed. "I only stopped deleting the consequences," I said. My sister had absolutely no response because every single terrible outcome connected directly to a choice she made. She turned and pushed through the heavy glass doors, disappearing into the crowded city sidewalk. Before I could reach the exit myself, Diane stepped out from the shadow of the marble staircase. Mom held a folded piece of notebook paper in her shaking hands. She begged me to release a brief public statement confirming she had simply made a terrible mistake. She claimed the entire family desperately needed a united front to heal properly. Reaching into my winter coat pocket, I pulled out a printed transcript of her venue hallway text messages. I laid the paper flat on the security desk between us. "You made the exact same choice for years," I said, watching her gaze drop to her own printed words. The wedding was simply the first time it nearly killed me. I turned my back on her and walked out into the freezing winter air, pulling my coat tight against the wind. For the first time in 38 years, I did not look over my shoulder to see if my mother was crying. Exactly 1 week later, my cell phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. Mia sent a photograph of a white cardboard box sitting on an industrial metal shelving unit. The original artificial arrangement was finally being released from the local evidence lockup. The silk petals still looked perfectly crisp, completely untouched by the chaos they inadvertently caused. "Do you want the fake flowers back?" the coordinator asked in a following text message. "Or should I just destroy the box?" The air inside the local police precinct basement smelled of floor wax and old paper. Mia stood beside me as a bored clerk slid a white cardboard box across the scratched metal counter. Tearing the evidence tape required a small pocket knife, and the thick cardboard gave way with a hollow pop. Inside the dusty container rested the original artificial arrangement. Reaching down, my fingers brushed the single-folded silk petal and the tiny, loose silver thread near the stem. For 11 long months, this specific object had represented absolute terror in my mind. Touching the cold fabric now, the fear quietly evaporated. The fake flowers did not betray my trust. My own family simply weaponized a beautiful thing to serve their selfish needs. Grabbing the edge of the white satin binding, I unwrapped the thick ribbon entirely and dropped the fabric straight into a nearby trash can. "We are keeping the bouquet," I told Mia, closing the cardboard lid. Heavy spring rain hammered against the ceiling of our Waltham townhouse a few weeks later. Sitting on the living room sofa, listening to the downpour, brought a deep and profound sense of peace. The water did not leak into the kitchen anymore because Ethan and I finally hired a contractor to replace the entire roof. We paid the massive invoice, using the exact savings account Diane had tried to drain for her fake dental emergency. Our restored emergency fund sat quietly in the local bank, and our dining room now hosted loud, joyful dinners with actual friends. Stability turned out to be the ultimate payoff. Returning to my occupational therapy clinic happened slowly, governed entirely by my own physical healing process instead of someone else's content schedule. Part of the civil settlement money went towards something permanently measurable. Sitting at my kitchen island, I signed a large donation check funding comprehensive anaphylaxis emergency kits for the entire pediatric rehabilitation center. I did not record a promotional video about the contribution, and nobody posted a dramatic story online to farm internet sympathy. The quiet victory felt incredibly solid. That same afternoon, a surprising email arrived from Vanessa at Bright Path Living. The vice president forwarded a revised corporate handbook. The company officially updated their internal policies regarding employee content creation, mandating strict medical consent forms for any media featuring family members. Speaking up actually forced the massive corporate machinery to change its gears. The real test of that hard-won peace arrived exactly 1 year after the original disaster. February brought another bitterly cold Saturday to Massachusetts, but the interior of the Botanical Conservatory felt incredibly warm. We rented a private indoor greenhouse filled exclusively with broad green leaves, thick vines, and hanging ferns. Absolutely no blooming flowers were permitted inside the glass walls. The guest list only included 40 people who had stood by our side without ever demanding I erase my own trauma for their comfort. Mia walked into the bridal suite holding a physical silver clipboard. She did not just offer a verbal promise about the vendor deliveries. The coordinator handed me a printed safety checklist, and I signed my own name at the bottom in blue ink. A thick cream envelope sat on the dressing table near my mirror, threatening to ruin the quiet morning. The return address belonged to Diane. Mom had mailed a letter begging for a brief meeting, writing on the back flap that enough time had passed for our family to heal and move forward. Sliding my thumb under the heavy wax seal, I read exactly 2 sentences before stopping completely. The written apology remained entirely focused on how much the separation hurt her own heart. She still desperately needed me to fix her emotional discomfort. Folding the heavy paper back into neat thirds, I placed it inside a larger mailing envelope addressed to Rachel. I added a small yellow sticky note to the front. "No contact means no contact," I wrote, sealing the package shut. Ethan stepped into the warm greenhouse suite wearing a dark gray suit. He carried the old silk bouquet, now wrapped tightly in a thick emerald green velvet ribbon. Handing the arrangement over, my husband took a step back and simply waited. My hands gripped the artificial stems. The weight felt incredibly light, completely manageable, and deeply familiar. Running my thumb over the crushed velvet, no hidden moisture chilled my skin. A string quartet started playing a slow, beautiful melody from the main conservatory floor beyond the heavy wooden doors. Nobody rushed into the room to force the schedule. Mia did not push my spine forward, and Ethan simply smiled, offering his steady arm. The first time, my sister chose what I carried. This time, everyone waited while I chose for myself. Sometimes, the hardest lesson you will ever have to learn is that sharing the same bloodline does not automatically grant someone a permanent, free pass to destroy your peace. For years, society and relatives might have conditioned you to believe that being the bigger person always means swallowing your own pain, just to keep the family picture looking perfect. But walking away from a toxic, exploitative dynamic is never an act of selfishness. It is a fundamental act of survival. You cannot heal in the exact same environment that continuously breaks you down. When people repeatedly demonstrate that they value their own comfort, their public image, or their personal gain over your actual physical and emotional safety, you have to believe their actions over their empty apologies. Forgiveness is a beautiful concept, but it does not require giving anyone another opportunity to hurt you. You have every absolute right to document the truth, draw an unbreakable line in the sand, and completely refuse to absorb the consequences of their terrible choices. True family protects you from the fire, rather than pushing you directly into the flames and expecting you to laugh at the burns. It takes immense, heartbreaking courage to finally stop setting yourself on fire just to keep other people warm. You deserve to build a stable, quiet life where your personal boundaries are respected, rather than constantly treated as a challenge to overcome. Have you ever had to make the agonizing choice to walk away from a close family member to protect your own physical or mental well-being? And what was the specific moment you finally realized that enough was enough? Share your own journey in the comments below, because your quiet courage might be exactly what another woman desperately needs to hear today.